Have you ever looked at your life and felt nothing? Not relief, not gratitude, not even sadness. Just a vague, heavy emptiness, like walking through a beautiful dream that you can't feel anymore. Everything is where it's supposed to be, but something is missing, something invisible, unnameable. You wake up, you work, you laugh when expected, you nod at conversations that don't reach you, and when you're finally alone, you stare at the ceiling, wondering if anyone really knows you. What if the life you're living isn't really yours? We are taught to believe that normalcy is safety, that predictability is maturity, that comfort equals happiness. But what if comfort is just another word for sedation? What if the routines you follow like gospel are nothing more than rituals of self-erasure? Most people don't live, they perform. We wear expressions sculpted for approval, speak words rehearsed for validation, play roles designed by a culture that fears the unknown. We become what the world wants to see, and in that performance, we vanish. You're not tired because life is hard. You're tired because you've been pretending for too long. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege is rare, because most people never question the illusion they live in. They confuse repetition with purpose. They confuse noise with meaning. They confuse acceptance with love. Let me give you an image. A hall of mirrors. You walk through it every day, mistaking reflection for identity. You adjust your behavior to how each mirror bends your image. You smile when the world smiles. You hide when it frowns. And over time, you forget there's even a you beyond the glass. This is the illusion. Not just the illusion of society, but the illusion of self. You are not what you do. You are not what you provide. You are not what they think. But the world profits when you forget this, because the moment you question the illusion, the structure begins to tremble. And so they teach you to stay asleep. They reward obedience with likes. They label silence as weakness. They tell you that independence is selfish. They feed your fears with comfort and call it peace. But peace that requires your submission isn't peace. It's anesthesia. Have you ever noticed how you apologize for existing? Not with words, but with your posture. With your silence in rooms that invalidate you. With your willingness to say yes when your soul screams no. This isn't just politeness. It's a ritual. A slow spiritual death masked as maturity. And here lies the fracture. Because no matter how perfect your image becomes, how well you've adapted, smiled, blended in, there's a voice inside you whispering something terrifying. This isn't who I am. You can silence it. You can bury it under achievements, relationships, distractions. But it will return. At night, in dreams, in moments of quiet, in that sudden grief you feel after good news. Because the soul doesn't care how well you're performing. It wants truth, not applause. And truth by nature destroys illusions. So let me ask you, do you really want to wake up? Because once you begin to question the mirrors, they shatter. And what's left is not glamorous. It's raw, unfiltered, frightening, but it's yours. And that is the beginning. You said yes. Again. You didn't want to. Your body tensed. Your intuition whispered no. But you said yes anyway. Because that's what you do. That's what's expected. And somewhere along the way, that silent betrayal became normal. There's a kind of chaos that doesn't scream. It seduces. It disguises itself as structure. As just how life is. This is the most dangerous form of illusion, the kind that becomes a habit. You grew up in noise, not necessarily in volume, but in confusion, in contradiction, in emotional fog. You learned that love could be conditional, that attention could vanish without reason, that safety depended on how well you played a part, so you adapted. You built a character to survive. And now, As an adult, you don't question the discomfort anymore. You live inside it. You wear it like a second skin. You call it adulthood. You call it responsibility. But what it really is a system of quiet self-erasure. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is fate misunderstood. Not some mystical force, but the repetition of old pain disguised as routine. You are not choosing freely. You are reenacting, responding to life with a script written decades ago, by people who never saw you, by fears that were never yours. You confuse being stable with being numb. You confuse coping with living. You confuse tolerance with resilience. But deep down, something feels off, like you're out of sync with your own existence. You see others laugh, succeed, connect, and instead of joy, you feel detachment, like watching life through glass, present but not involved, smiling but not feeling. You think maybe you're depressed, maybe you're too sensitive, maybe something is wrong with you. But what if this dull ache isn't a flaw in you? What if it's a symptom of truth trying to surface? The truth that you've been normalizing dysfunction, that you've been decorating your prison cell and calling it home, that you were trapped in a cycle, not because you were weak, but because you were loyal to an identity that was never yours. And here's where the illusion deepens, because the world will praise you for it. They will call you selfless, reliable, strong, adaptable. But beneath those compliments is a darker reality. You've become functional in environments that are killing your spirit. And that is not strength, that is survival. And survival is not living. So now we arrive at the quiet horror. What if everything you've called normal is actually a trauma response? You don't need another self-help routine. You don't need to optimize your mornings or rewrite your goals. You need to stop. You need to look. You need to question everything you've accepted as unchangeable. Because when you start to unravel what you've mistaken for truth, something incredible happens. The chaos begins to lose its grip, and you begin to remember what peace actually feels like. If your normal is a trauma response, then who are you without it? This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you strip away the roles, the smiles, the routines, what's left? Silence, confusion, maybe fear, but also the possibility of truth. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It's not inherently wrong. We all need a face to meet the world. The danger begins when you forget that it's a mask. And most people forget. You've worn it for so long. This version of yourself that is agreeable, composed, competent, emotionally low maintenance, that even you started believing it was real. But here's the secret. You didn't build the persona out of ambition. You built it out of fear. Fear of being rejected for your rawness. Fear of being punished for your anger. Fear of being abandoned for your authenticity. So you shaped yourself into what the world rewarded. You became efficient, accommodating, silent. You made yourself useful, lovable, digestible. And in the process, you disappeared. This is not melodrama. This is psychology. Because the soul can feel when it's living someone else's life. It sends signals, restlessness, fatigue, anxiety, apathy, not as punishment, but as a protest. The problem is, you've been taught to treat those signals like symptoms. So instead of listening, you suppress. You meditate to numb. You journal to control. You therapize your pain into something manageable. But the pain doesn't want management. It wants revelation. It wants you to see that the face you show to the world is not the same as the one that cries in the dark. There's nothing wrong with having a public self. The tragedy is believing that's all you are. Jung warned that over-identification with the persona leads to alienation, not just from others, but from the self. You become liked, admired, even respected. But none of it lands. Because deep inside, they don't love you. They love the mask. And that realization, it hurts more than loneliness. Because it means you could be surrounded by people and still be completely unseen. You've curated a life that protects you from rejection, but also isolates you from intimacy. So let me ask you, when was the last time someone saw you and you didn't flinch? Not the polished you, not the diplomatic you, the raw, unfiltered, maybe even messy version of you, the version that doesn't smile out of obligation, that doesn't pretend to be okay, that doesn't need to be useful to be loved. Does that version even get to exist anymore? Or did you exile it long ago in exchange for safety? This is where the truth cuts deep. The persona you use to survive is the same one preventing you from being alive. You can't heal while pretending. You can't be whole while hiding. And the most radical act of liberation may not be leaving a relationship, quitting a job, or changing your location. It may simply be taking off the mask, quietly, slowly, and risking that the world might not recognize you anymore. But you will, and that is enough. You think you're making choices. You think your opinions are yours. You think you know why you feel what you feel. But most of your life is lived on autopilot. Not because you're lazy, but because you're unconscious. And the unconscious doesn't shout. It whispers. It scripts your reactions. It chooses your partners. It triggers your fears. It creates patterns and calls them personality. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So let me ask you, how many of your decisions are truly conscious? Why do you always attract people who need fixing? Why do you shut down when someone gets too close? Why do compliments make you suspicious? Why do you self-sabotage right before something beautiful begins? These aren't quirks. They're not random. They're echoes. Echoes of childhood moments you barely remember. Echoes of beliefs you inherited, not chose. Echoes of pain that never got processed, only buried. The unconscious doesn't forget what you've ignored. It doesn't move on. It waits. And when the moment is right, when you vulnerable, tired, hopeful, it speaks. Not in language, but in patterns. It's the reason you keep ending up in the same type of relationship, despite swearing you de-change. It's why you sabotage peace the moment it arrives. It's why you fear joy more than pain. Because pain is familiar. Familiarity is the unconscious in action. Comfort is not always safety. It's often programming. You've mistaken your impulses for intuition, your triggers for truth, your anxiety for identity. But they're all just signals, signposts pointing back to the source, a part of you that was wounded and left unseen. Here's the brutal truth. The unconscious runs your life not because it's powerful, but because you never dared to look at it. It holds your shame, your envy, your resentment, your forbidden desires, the emotions you weren't allowed to feel. And when denied, they don't disappear. They fester. They leak out through sarcasm, passive aggression, addiction, perfectionism, people-pleasing. You've spent years trying to manage the surface, but the storm is beneath. No amount of logic can rewrite what emotion has carved into your nervous system. This is not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of courage. The courage to trace the thread of your pain back to its root, to see the monster you feared in the dark, and realize it's a child in disguise, a child who just wanted to be seen, held, heard. The unconscious is not your enemy. It's your neglected twin. It knows the parts of you that you've disowned to survive. It holds the fragments of your truth, but you can't reclaim them by thinking. You reclaim them by listening, feeling, observing without judgment. This is the beginning of inner revolution, not by fighting your impulses, but by understanding their origin. Because the moment you name what was once hidden, You reclaim the power it held over you. And in that moment, for the first time, you become the author of your life, not the character trapped in someone else's script. You believe you re-free. You believe you re-choosing. You believe that your desires are yours. But freedom, real freedom, is not the ability to choose between options handed to you by the world. It's the power to question why those options exist in the first place. Most of your choices were never yours. You were conditioned to want what you want, taught to fear what you fear, trained to chase validation disguised as success, to seek connection while abandoning yourself, to call survival love, to confuse silence with peace. Nietzsche warned us, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. But how can you own yourself? If you've been taught to fear solitude more than self-betrayal, they told you that obedience was virtue, that productivity was purpose, that being agreeable would keep you safe. So you built your identity like a house in a neighborhood you never chose, one that was already mapped before you could think. And the illusion? They told you it was your dream. But dreams that are planted by fear become prisons. And prisons that are decorated well enough become invisible. This is the paradox. You were raised to believe that control equals freedom. But the more you try to control how you're perceived, how you're loved, how life unfolds, the more enslaved you become. Because true freedom has nothing to do with controlling outcomes. It has everything to do with detaching from illusions. The illusion that your worth must be proven, that you must be chosen, that you must be flawless to be safe. You were trained to earn what should have been yours by birthright. Presence, peace, permission to be. And the most brutal part? Even your rebellion may be part of the script. When you choose the opposite of what hurt you, are you really free? Or are you still reacting to a wound, still living inside its shadow? True freedom begins not when you change your choices, but when you change the one who is choosing. And that requires that you meet the part of you that has never been allowed to choose at all. You think you're a good person. You try to be kind. You avoid conflict. You help others. You apologize quickly. You keep the peace. But beneath the surface, there's another you. A part you pretend doesn't exist. A voice you silence. A rage you swallow. A need you shame. That part is your shadow. Carl Jung called the shadow the unconscious aspect of the personality, which the conscious ego does not identify in itself. In other words, everything you don't want to be, but are. You think you buried it. You think you grew out of it. You think your self-control is strength. But repression is not strength. It's a delay. And everything you reject in yourself eventually finds its way back to you, through the people you attract, through the triggers you don't understand, through the sudden bursts of emotion that feel like they came from nowhere. Have you ever exploded over something small? Walked away from something good without knowing why? Sabotaged something beautiful before it could take root? That's not random. That's your shadow at work. The more you disown your shadow, the more power it gains. It becomes the puppeteer. It acts out in ways that expose your deepest wounds. Not to punish you, but to wake you. Because here's what no one tells you. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be seen. It contains everything you've denied. The anger you weren't allowed to feel. The desires you were told were shameful. The pain you never processed. The confidence you were punished for expressing. All the vitality you've suppressed. It's still there, but twisted in the dark. And until you face it, it will leak out in your life like a slow, silent poison. In your relationships, your career, your addictions, your moods. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. but by making the darkness conscious. This is the work, not chasing the light, not trying to fix yourself, but sitting with what you feared, making space for what you've judged, and asking, what part of me have I tried to kill just to be accepted? Because the truth is brutal. What you reject controls you, but what you integrate transforms you. You don't need to become someone else. You need to become whole. And that means reclaiming the parts of you that you were taught to abandon. This isn't about becoming darker. It's about becoming real. And realness is messy. It's contradictory. It's powerful. Because when you stop rejecting yourself, you become untouchable. Not because you've mastered every emotion, but because there's nothing left to hide. It starts quietly. You miss a deadline. You cancel plans. You stop replying right away. You sleep a little longer. You say no, just once. And the world around you flinches. They say, "Are you okay? You've changed. You're not yourself." But what they don't realize is that you're finally starting to be yourself, because the collapse they fear is the awakening you've needed. Every illusion breaks before the truth emerges. The version of you they knew, the always available, always pleasing, always smiling mask, was built for survival, not for living. And when you begin to dismantle it, there will be confusion, fear, even grief, because you've spent years watering a garden that was never yours. And now you're walking away from it, not with bitterness, but with clarity. There is a moment in everyone's life when the scaffolding collapses, the role stops making sense, the mask becomes too heavy, the silence too loud. This moment is not a breakdown, it is a breakthrough. The moment when what was once unbearable becomes unacceptable. When you'd rather feel pain than live numb. When you'd rather disappoint others than betray yourself again. And it hurts. Because illusions don't die easily, they burn. And when they do, they take pieces of your false identity with them. But the fire is sacred. It doesn't destroy you. It purifies you. It's the moment you stop trying to be who the world expects and start becoming who your soul remembers. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this collapse is the invitation, not to escape, not to fix, but to stand still in the ashes and finally ask, what was I building my life on? And do I still want it? Because when the illusion cracks, you don't fall, you awaken. Something shifts. You no longer rush to respond. You don't explain as much. You sit longer in silence. You start choosing your company instead of being chosen. And for the first time, you feel it. Presence. Not the kind that seeks to be seen, but the kind that is fully rooted in itself. You're not trying to impress anymore. You're not performing strength. You're not chasing what never loved you back. You are simply here, breathing without permission, existing without apology. And it's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes with stillness, with knowing, with the sacred quiet of no longer pretending. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of ourselves we once disowned. And now, you're beginning to live from that place. The energy you once spent keeping everyone comfortable, you now use to keep yourself conscious. The time you once wasted decoding other people's moods, you now devote to studying your own. And the boundaries? They rise naturally, not as fences, but as recognitions. This drains me. This nourishes me. This is no longer mine to carry. You start to say no without guilt. You say yes with intention. And when someone demands an explanation for your shift, you smile, softly, without shame, and say nothing. Because presence doesn't justify itself. It just is. You begin to notice the noise in others, the way they fill silence with fear, the way they seek validation in every sentence. and instead of judging it, you simply no longer participate, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You are no longer interested in being understood by those committed to misunderstanding. You are no longer addicted to fixing, saving, pleasing. You are not available for anything that costs your peace. And slowly, the world adjusts. People pull away. Those who needed your performance. Others move closer. Those who resonate with your stillness. But most importantly, you move closer to yourself. And that is the presence you were missing all along. Not one that wins the room, not one that controls the chaos, but one that stays, even when no one is watching. Because now you know, there is nothing more powerful than a person who is no longer afraid to simply exist. You thought becoming yourself would feel like a rival, that once you stopped pretending, you'd be embraced, understood, celebrated. But something unexpected happens. You begin to vanish, not from yourself, but from the eyes of those who only knew your mask. They say you've changed. They say you're distant. They say you've become cold. But the truth is simple. You're just not performing anymore. And when you stop performing, the audience disappears. You thought authenticity would attract more people, but it attracts fewer, and the right ones. Because when you remove the mask, some people no longer recognize you, and others can't stand the light of your realness. Not because you are harsh, but because your presence confronts the lies they still live in. In a world addicted to noise, silence is a threat. In a world trained by control, sovereignty is mistaken for arrogance. In a world where love is confused with sacrifice, self-respect looks like abandonment. So yes, becoming real means becoming invisible to the many, but more visible than ever to yourself. And that is the liberation. You are no longer consumed by being perceived. You are no longer driven by how you appear in someone else's story. You are no longer seduced by the approval that costs your soul. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But privilege is not comfort. It's a test. It's a loneliness that purifies. It's a silence that clarifies. So when the world forgets you, do not panic. They never really saw you. They saw the version of you that protected their comfort. And now that version is gone. What remains is you. Quiet, solid, undeniable. And those who are meant to meet you here, in this space of stripped down truth, will not need your mask to love you. So here we are. The mirrors have shattered. The mask has fallen. The noise has faded. And in the stillness, something remains. Not clarity, not certainty, but a deeper question. A question that doesn't demand an answer. Only presence. Who are you when no one is watching? Not the version that pleases, not the version that adjusts, not the version that earns space by shrinking, but the raw one, the flawed one, the one you've hidden even from yourself. Because this entire time, you weren't trying to be loved. You were trying to be safe, and now you see it. The illusion was never the world. It was the belief that you had to perform to belong. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Not because acceptance is painful, but because it ends the performance. And when the performance ends, so does the illusion. So now I ask you, are you ready? Not to change, not to improve, but to stop pretending? Because the truth, the one you've been circling this whole time, is not something to be found. It's something to be remembered. You've always known. You've just been afraid to look. But now, you're looking. And that, in the quietest, most irreversible way, is the beginning of everything.